Welcome to Really American. I am Michael Hayne. I recently had a in-depth discussion with Rich Logus of Leaving MAGA. If you recall, Rich spoke at the Democratic National Convention where he essentially renounced, repudiated, and apologized for his devotion to the stage 5 inoperable cancer that is MAGA. Rich is actually a pretty educated man, and he's also a man of convictions and morals. And I spoke to him at length as to what actually brought him down the dark rabbit hole of MAGA and how he was able to finally see the light at the end of the tunnel, and that light being one that doesn't perpetually lie and claim that the Democrats want it to be dark every day. So I hope you enjoy my discussion with Rich of Leaving MAGA.
um, Felt politically estranged and alienated from our two-party system. I thought that the both parties were the same. And then in 2015, though I wasn't immediately enamored with Trump's campaign, once he started talking about these issues of politicians not really representing all Americans, jobs going overseas, communities being hollowed out, I remember nodding in concurrence quite a bit. And I came to realize that Trump was viewed as a threat by both parties. And as someone who really believed that the two parties were essentially the same and didn't really listen, didn't recognize Americans, and that there was this belief, I think, amongst a lot of Americans that government wasn't serving them well. And I think Trump really spoke to that. And over time, throughout his campaign, I found myself more and more gravitating toward what it was that he was saying. And I wound up volunteering uh, as someone who wrote part of the call script in early 2016. I was phone banking. I was doing a lot of the grassroots work. So
I don't want to
my
interrupt you
entree,
there, but you mentioned
it's
right
okay.
there, like grassroots work. So there actually was more of an organizational campaign. It wasn't like the concept of a plan, because I feel like in 2016 there actually was more of a concerted effort and more of a somewhat functioning campaign apparatus. Because you just mentioned to me you were, doing a lot of the, I guess, nuts and bolts of the campaign. So you were, it seemed like there was more of a ground game then. So that's why I wanted to ask you. So you were involved in that in 2016?
Yes, and I should say that there were many volunteers who did a lot more than I did. But one of the something I did contribute to was I wrote part of the call script. There was a line in the call script that said, "Let's make history and elect Donald Trump president," and I contributed that line because that's how I felt. I was that invested into the campaign, because something about politics that is true, I think, irrespective of partisanship, is that Americans do tend to find enticing new and novel candidates and movements. I think
That with
President
Barack
Obama,
Obama.
that yep, exactly. And I think that it's more logical than a lot of people may give credence to about how someone may have gone from Obama to Trump. I think for a lot of MAGA Americans,
I'm
and I
sorry.
say
To
Americans,
me, it just seems like going from Bruce Springsteen to Ted Nugent. But go on.
well, there is a little bit of that autonomous outsider part of the campaign and what each candidate was representing. And I
That's
think a
true.
lot of MAGA Americans, and I say MAGA Americans, not MAGA Republicans, because I want to be inclusive in everyone. I think a lot of MAGA Americans actually supported Trump for reasons that were generally not that controversial. Anodyne reasons of, okay, we need someone to shake up Washington. This person seems like he's willing to obliterate the established political order. Notwithstanding the comments about McCain and women and Muslims, we look the other way. I look the other way because I believe that the other side, the opposition, Hillary and the Democrats, were these existential threats. And I allowed myself to succumb to believing that with relative ease. And I take responsibility because I need to apologize, as I do in every interview and every event I speak at and address, that I have to apologize for helping Donald Trump divide our country. I assisted him in dividing the nation, tearing asunder families and households and places of worships and friendships,
Yeah, man. Thanks for
complicity,
ruining my
complicity,
Thanksgiving, Rich. Yeah.
a lot of them, like your holidays, whether they were, someone said to me the other day, he says, I'm an atheist, and I go to my parents' Christmas party, and I can't escape it. And I said, well, I'm sorry, I was complicit in that because I pitted strangers and
Yeah,
families
yeah.
against each other.
Yeah,
But
you
I
stirred
say it
up Christmas
because
parties. Yeah.
a lot of them, happy holidays. It's like, oh my, it's like, stop saying that. Meanwhile, Trump sends holiday cards out that say holiday, but that's a whole other side note. Because
Right.
with MAGA, I want to stress for people to try to understand why. Why are people still there? What was attractive about it? MAGA is a community. Now, it is a toxic community, which is why there's this work of trying to empower people to leave that community and have a new place to go with leaving MAGA. But it is a place where people have shared values, they're like minded, there's a common enemy. And while some might recoil at this next statement, most Americans in the MAGA community, deep down, there is a goodness in there. Now, and I'm not saying all.
Not on my
Some people,
TikTok
like any
algorithm.
bigger. Well, you know what though? That's a point that is important because it shows how when we see some of the bad ones who are in the community, and there are bad ones, we tend to see a lot of them over and over because it's what the largely speaking
Yeah, we
media
see the tourists on
media
January
ecosphere,
6th.
right?
I agree with you.
That's right.
So I don't want to interrupt you. I just wanted to go back to a point
Okay.
you were originally making with regards to your initial attraction. Like, I could see that in 2016. Like, I mean, like, first of all, let me just go on the record that say, like, I supported Bernie Sanders, and not just because I do the impression. I supported Bernie Sanders, and because I think at that time, a lot of us were like so disaffected with the establishment. We so were thirsting for that type of enthusiasm that and from 2008 when Obama first came on the stage, and like we just like all saw Hillary at the time as an extension of that stale
Sure.
establishmentarian, that just like doing anything and anything to pay credence to whatever poll or anything at the time. So, and like, I mean, like, I kind of got it. Like, I ultimately wound up, voting for Hillary, but like, I understood it. Like, I understood that initial enthusiasm. What I didn't understand and can never understand is how since then, and now this was going to come to my second point, because you, I guess, were rattled when, when Trump was just basically like, I don't know about this plague. It's not going on. And there's bleach. Put it in your like you seem to be rattled by that. And I tend to think a lot of people on the fence, a lot I know this personally. I mean, this is anecdotal, but I have all different, types of friends, Republicans and everything. And my one, she was just saying, like, I can't do this. I can't do this. What
Yeah.
was going on with the response to COVID and everything? And I think like she was never like a card carrying MAGA. She was never into that. She's always an independent voter, and she'll thoroughly research issues, everything like that. But that just like what did it. And I feel like that did it for a lot of and I don't know if you'll agree with that, but I feel like that did it for a lot of people who may have not, they weren't like I said, showing up at all the rallies and dressing up in the coal merchant, but they just were like, okay, economically, whatever. And that's kind of what drove them away, and why I guess Trump lost a lot of the suburbs. So, but I just wanted, go ahead, go on.
I think for me, so I didn't walk around with the Make America Great Again hats. I've been to a couple of rallies. I didn't view myself as that kind of a MAGA person. I actually viewed myself as doing the campaign work, the activist work, the volunteer work. I was writing for MAGA friendly sites like The Federalist and American Thinker, American Greatness. I was not paid for any of this work. I paid out of pocket for professionally produced podcasts. So when I would see the ones at the corner waving the Trump flags or the flotillas, great. They're on our side. But I didn't really look at that work as work. I didn't see that as, okay, we're actually working to advancing the goal of making America great again. For them, it was more of a social gathering. For me, I actually felt like I was in this political battle against all threats who were not with MAGA. And it's really important for me to stress this point, Michael, that I'm not talking about just Democrats. Anybody who was not with us was against us. And if you were 99% with us, you were 0% with us. That's how I actually viewed my place in the MAGA community and what my role was as that activist and as this MAGA soldier to advance all of this. This is, and I sincerely believed all of that. And I think that when we won in 16, you're validated, you're vindicated. It wasn't that I said, great, we won, walk away, see you in 4 years. I just got so much deeper into it because we were on the winning side. And I had said publicly at a radio show that Trump would, in Philadelphia, he'd be the nominee and would win the general. And everyone, oh, Rich, I know you want him to win. I just don't want you to be disappointed. I said, I'm not going to be disappointed, and he's going to. Watch and see. And I bring that up because I feel
you're talking
like
about in 2016. You're talking about in 2016,
16,
right?
16.
Because, right,
and
no,
in 20,
I just wanted to say, because he himself, I mean, didn't he just? I mean, I think he just went to start his own news network. He has that now. I think he was just bored, and I didn't think he thought he was going to win, though.
I don't think so either. We believed it.
Certainly, Melania was probably crying more than anybody because she didn't want him to win. But I do feel like this was just the game show host guy going out there. You know, how can I mesh with people like Jerry Springer? I don't feel like this was a serious concerted effort, even though, and that's what kind of like is strange, because there's people like you who like legitimately were doing the work, and you are, as I say, because you're an educated guy. And like you said, you're not one of the rebel. You're not on the side of the highway at like 10 o'clock at night. You know, you're home with your family at the end of the day, but you were doing the work that needed to be done. But so you did predict that he was going to win in 2016. But I mean, it wasn't just you. I mean, there was people. I know there was Michael Moore that was saying it was going to happen as well. So, I mean, it just.
Yeah. There was this interesting cross ideological. That's right. Yeah. There was this cross ideological feeling and consensus among some. And I will tell you that in 20, privately, I had a lot of critical conversations about Trump and how he was handling the pandemic. I actually had critical conversations with some degree of regularity throughout 2016 and 20. Charlottesville was one, COVID was another. So yes, there were these censorious, harsh critiques of what Trump was doing, but that was private. But publicly, didn't say anything. Because publicly, even the remotest of criticism, you'd be exiled out of MAGA. You'd be a MAGA apostate and heretic. You'd be booed off the stage, run out of the community for just the tiniest scintilla of criticism, even if it was warranted. Now I know what you're. I know I can feel and hear your thoughts now. Like, it's a cult. It's a cult, right? I can feel it, right? And the reason I caution against some of the cult language. Do I agree that there were aspects of it for me? Can I understand why someone who was not in MAGA might think that way? Yes. But one of the reasons I caution against it is because I think that rhetoric is unhelpful if we want to try to extract people out of MAGA, because I think that kind of rhetoric, it pushes people closer to Trump. It strengthens that tie that is already there, that binds Trump and the community members, because right-wing politics have not really been a community. It wasn't a community with the Bushes and late John McCain, rest in peace, or Mitt Romney. All of a sudden, Trump comes in and he is the leader of this community. That is why there is this devotion to him, because he's the general in this good versus evil battle against liberalism. And that is what I sincerely thought at the time for several years.
All right. See, now that's where I have to counter, just because it's people that literally, and Howard Stern, you know, brings up this point constantly. He's like, the people that worship Trump the most are the ones he hates the most. Trump would literally throw, maybe not Ivanka, but would honestly throw all of them under the bus if it meant him avoiding prison. I always say that he would walk on their corpse to avoid a puddle. I believe he just recently insulted the fireman who died at one of his rallies. This is a man who has proven time and time again that he is a malignant narcissist, that he just has no concern, for anybody but himself. And it boggles the mind that anyone who isn't a multimillionaire or a billionaire, because they quietly support him, because obviously, but that you could somehow, going back to 2016, I get he was going to those communities, he was speaking to those people, all right. But his policy, while he was in during 2020, his tax scheme that made corporations taxes permanent, whereas middle class taxes have gone up since then. So when that happened, and I look at all that, and I just you just see that there is virtually no concern at all for working people or really anyone who just isn't buying his crappy made in China cult merch and, isn't showing up wearing like the gold spray painted sneakers and just saying like, oh, almighty Don, crap in our mouths. We think it's chocolate and we'll pay for seconds. Like, I don't. And this, the idea that the Republican Party for the most part has just gotten worse. And you would think that one moment, that defining moment on January 6th, where they're just be like, okay, yeah, the guy tried to like, have his vice president hung and this and that and a violent overthrow. All right, we're going to walk away from this and we're going to start from scratch. But no, double down. And I just feel like Trump is this massive albatross that they will forever be wearing around his neck. You want to talk about winning? 1-0. Lost the midterms, barely took back the House. All of his candidates, anyone who's attached to him either goes to prison or loses horribly. So I just can't for the life of me still understand why anybody sensible in that movement, because you're sensible, you understand these things, how anybody who's sensible can still support or vote for this guy. Like, and I just think what it is just it's a hatred of the other side. That's all I can think of. That's my only conclusion.
I don't disagree with the hatred part. I do agree with the illogicality. I think there are a couple of variables here that I just want to offer for those who are going to see this for their consideration.
Sure.
One of the major considerations is that it is an unnatural act for us to admit when we were wrong, for us to acknowledge a mistake, and for us if we realize, well, like in my case, I was lied to about pretty much everything. I realized that I made public statements based on those lies I believed. I sacrificed time with my family and my business. My MAGA second family took precedence over my own blood family at times.
Like a mafia.
And then there's this, it's like there is this realization. Granted, it's to paraphrase Ernest Hemingway, the late Hemingway, it's happened gradually and then suddenly all at once, the epiphany. But there's this realization of, holy shit, I actually believed all of these lies. I thought that my opposition were bona fide threats to my life, my livelihood, and my family. And when you realize that, you either listen to those doubts or you just stay in the comfort of a dishonest existence because one views it as harder to leave than to stay. And I think that does to some extent explain why do people who have to know that so much of these statements are lies, why stay? And I think part of it is that investment. It's not just financial, it's emotional. The identity of so many of them are completely entangled in this MAGA community. And unless there's an exit ramp, unless there's some way out, which is what I am trying to build with our team at Leaving MAGA, even those who know they should leave, for a lot of them, if they don't have that off ramp, they won't leave. Because it's just really hard to admit to oneself that I might have been conned. And being
Isn't it always
conned,
like it's easier to con than to admit that you've been conned?
That's right. And good people, intelligent people can be exploited and manipulated because MAGA, as I have come to understand, is not new. It isn't novel. It's the latest iteration of the right wing. The difference, though, is that it was made into a community. And because of all of these mythologies that have to do with any of them under the sun, Michael, from your disarmament to replacing white people to grooming my kids in public schools into being transgender Marxists, they make the adherents so traumatized and keep them in these potential states of panic. I also think they paint the opposition
as much cooler than they actually are. Like when I hear some of these outrageous, exaggerated things like, hey, he's going to be injecting communism into kids drinking water supply. I'm like, how the hell do I do that? I can't even drink my own water.
I mean, that's for me, I'm the Democrat psyop. And I sit back and think, you're giving me way too much credit to think I'm smart enough to actually pull that off, right? And if anyone is listening to this who's going to say that I'm paid please let me know where this money is, because by everyone else's standards, I'm probably a billionaire at this point. I don't know where all this money is out there. If you know where it is, please let me know.
I always say George Soros, he owes me some retroactive payment. I want my mansion.
Somewhere there's this money out there. And I know that
well, you even said from the get-go that you were like gratis when you were working in the beginning, that you weren't getting compensated. So when you were actually aligned with Trump. Yeah.
It was my time, and I was proud to do it.
You were a believer.
Because for the first time, I felt like in my adult political life, I was part of something. And I think when we break it down and deconstruct it that way, it becomes a little less illogical. It's not that I'm defending. I don't defend my or anyone else's ignorance. But I do think it would behoove the nation to remember that all of us are susceptible to being influenced. And there is something about right-wing mythologies that I do think prey upon people's natural fears and concerns. And it's easier to get inculcated into that way of thinking than I think a lot of people may just acknowledge and may realize.
And that's what's so terrifying about it. But now my second thing I wanted to ask you was, like, since you've had all these epiphanies and all, hopefully, I'm hoping you haven't gotten like many of the crazy death threats. You haven't gotten any of that, you and your family, or anything?
Thankfully, no. Most of the comments are psyop. You're paid.
I feel more important because I get death threats, so I'm much cooler than you.
Well, I someone right before coming on that I haven't. I've got to graduate to that. It's like I'm still undergrad, but I do get pederast. That one I get with some regularity. So maybe a consolation prize to the death threats, right? But I get that one a lot, and not MAGA. You weren't Trump voter, and I know that that's all expected. You are, as I am. We're all in the arena, and it's just like Hyman Roth told Michael in The Godfather 2. It's the business we've chosen.
I like that we're on the mob theme we were talking about, and you brought up The Godfather.
See, I thought that. See, I was thinking that.
Love the reference. Anytime you can rope in a Godfather reference, I'm good. Although for Trump, I'm going to make you an offer. I don't know. I have a concept of an offer. Okay. Now, what I wanted to ask you now. So, you said that it wasn't like a cult. Now, you said that. Those were your words. My words are that it kind of is like a cult. I like to liken Donald Trump to Jim Jones, but I feel like Trump would probably, charge you for the commemorative cup. It would be signed by Hannibal Lecter. And then he would sneak off to Mar-a-Lago when it was time to take the poison. So what I want to know, because this is what you do at your organization, are you at all, are you deprogramming? Have you been successful in your efforts in getting people to do this? Because I just feel like and I say this, and I say this with honest and candor. I'm like a comedian, so I'm usually joking half the time. But I mean this seriously. What are you guys going to do if he loses? Are you going to get a personality? Are you going to go back to your lives? So that's my final question I want to ask you is, have you been successful in your efforts? And so if you can just articulate that, I'd appreciate it.
Yeah, sure. And it's going to be when Trump does lose in November, because no one should construe my statement as reason not to vote. I think that Trump and the Republican Party are going to be historically repudiated. I think it's actually about to shock a lot of people in the world what's about to happen. And when that happens, and I'm someone, as a side note, as a co-chair of Republicans for Harris here in Florida, I was asked by the campaign to serve in that role as a surrogate role, and I agreed to it without hesitation. It's an unpaid role, but I want to help us put Donald Trump in America's rearview mirror. When Trump loses, there are amongst the MAGA Americans, there's going to be millions and millions of lost, wandering souls. And we are going to have to think about, as a nation, how to find a reconciliation for our country. And
it's almost like when they had those truth reconciliation commissions. I think it was following the apartheid in South Africa.
Yeah, South Africa, exactly. We're going to have, I believe, and we've had similar ones in our history, right? Post-Bellum America after the Civil War. We've got another one that's imminent. And as we move forward and put Trump in the rearview mirror, a lot of our allies are going to be those who are friends and family of those who are still in the thrall of MAGA. We have testimonials at our site, leavingmaga.org, These are individuals we met who had left MAGA, decided to publicly tell their stories with us. We've got
Oh,
other
really?
testimonials. We have,
They've publicly done so?
yes, yeah, yes. In fact, we've got some videos at Midas Touch Network. We've got testimonials on our site. We've got some others coming up where it may be fathers and sons talking about how parents left as a result of talking with their children. But it's going to require the patience needed to recognize that leaving a community one has so ingratiated oneself into, it's going to take time to say, yes, I made that mistake, and wait for the scales to fall from the eyes in the road to Damascus moment. But I know that if I was able to do it, I know that others can do it. I realize that the Republican Party is on the wrong side of life and death issues. I left, my catalyst was Ron DeSantis. Kids were getting sick with COVID and dying. He brings up anti-vaxxers in the summer of 21. Okay, I was not anti-vaccine. I didn't think the election was stolen. I didn't think COVID was a bioweapon. And then next, I'm reading more about January 6th. I diversify my news and information sources because all I was I was just in the right-wing media echo chamber. And then over the course of summer of 21 to 22, I realized that the Republican Party deemed acceptable avoidable deaths and suffering, and that the Republican Party and Trump said that right-wing politically motivated violence was okay. The reason that Trump is even a nominee today is because of the Republican Party. And that is why the party next month must be electorally mercy killed and repudiated in historic fashion. And I actually think that that is going to happen.
Well, I think most of us are kind of aware of that and the move and the enthusiasm surrounding Kamala Harris. It's pretty unprecedented. And I think it's just I will have absolutely, and I think Chris Christie, who I used to have many arguments, and I'm from New Jersey, so I've dealt with this guy personally and all, but he's come out and basically said, like, guys like, these feckless ones like, McConnell, Cruz, and all them, like,
right,
what are you gonna do? You've endorsed this. You have quietly, and I'm sorry, not quietly. You have openly embraced this, and the stench of MAGA is on you forever. But for me, I mean, they're scuzzy politicians anyway, and I think Ted Cruz may actually even lose his race. But like my concern, and this is why I want to interview you, is because you are targeting the individuals, average Americans that have
yes,
been susceptible to this, because they're the ones, because again, at the end of the day, they're the ones we have to live and coexist with. So
exactly right. And that comes back to that reconciliation,
right. So
part of this.
I applaud your efforts, and I'm glad you're doing this. And I wish you all the best with it. And I do hope that we have a massive landslide, and he just needs a big old diaper change. And obviously, we're not going to have another January 6th. So, anyway, Rich, thank you so much for doing this, and I applaud your efforts, and I wish you the best.
Thanks, Michael. I really appreciate having me on. Thanks so much.
Thank you so much.